Hello everyone, and welcome to our third workplace webinar titled Evaluating the Workplace. As you know, the Mental Health Commission is hosting a series of webinars for free on the last Wednesday at noon Eastern Time. We would love everyone to ask questions by using the chat function on the webinar, which is on the right side of your screen. We typically try to answer questions periodically throughout the webinar and hope to have a little extra time at the end for questions as well. But please do try and send all your questions to all participants rather than just me individually as a host, just so that we can ensure to get these going and answered during the webinar. Of course, if you would like to keep your question anonymous, you can always send me a private note or email after the session. Please do share and interact. So let's get started. My name is Samantha Kolopak, and I work with the Knowledge Exchange Center at the Mental Health Commission. And I'm going to be hosting today's session, so I would like to start off by introducing you to today's guest speaker, Merv Gilbert. Hi, Merv.
Hi, Samantha. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Merv Gilbert is a principal partner at Gilbert Acton Limited, which is a consulting group that fosters healthy workplace climates. He is a clinical psychologist with over 30 years of experience, and he is a primary participant in the development, evaluation, and dissemination of resources for workplace mental health. He has worked for governmental, private, and public sector organizations, and most recently, he was developing tools with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. So firstly, I'm going to set the stage for today's topic, evaluating the workplace. Merv will be then discussing some important information on the potential contributors to mental health issues at work. He's going to walk us through 3 different perspectives on improving psychological health and safety in the workplace, and then he will turn to help equip us with some more knowledge on how to effectively implement the Guarding Minds program in your workplace. Remember that you are always encouraged to make comments in the chat box and ask lots of questions. As you know, each month, the Mental Health Commission is hosting these webinars on different themes of the National Standard of Canada for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. You can download this free tool through our partners' website, including the Canada Standards Association Group and the Bureau Normalisation du Québec. Today, we will be talking about how to move your organization in the direction of protecting and promoting your employees' psychological safety and health. In times of economic turmoil, protecting our psychological health and safety of your workplace does take on a new level of urgency. And Merv is going to help us use the Guarding Minds at Work program to quickly identify any significant problems that we experience in our organizations, such as policies and practices to improve our organizational performance in some identified areas of concern. We're also going to be looking at how to evaluate the impact of our actions and learn how to sustain change over time. Promoting the standard has been an important part of the workplace portfolio, which is one of the Commission's 5 priority areas. We have been engaging in a variety of activities to help drive adoption of the standard. This includes the webinars, as well as showcasing leading organizations through video testimonials. And these are about 1 to 2 video clips, which we will be showcasing on our YouTube channel, as well as the website. We are also beginning an exciting project called the Case Study Project. And if you'd like to learn more, please do head to the Mental Health Commission website. Should your organization like to be part of a video testimonial or be involved in the Case Study Project, please do contact me individually, and you can do that by emailing me at my email, which is listed on the screen. The next Town Hall webinar will be October 30th, so please do save that date and join us. So let's get started, Merv. Thank you so much for being with us today. I see you've got a picture up here of Freud.
Yes, Freud was a funny fella who said some interesting things and some things which were a little bit silly, but there were some real pearls of wisdom. And in several of his works, he paraphrased this quote, essentially saying the two most important things are love and work. And I think that's very important to note. We can lose sight of this when we're talking about how people are struggling at work or talk about hump day. Thank God it's Friday. Work gets a kind of bad rap as being something which is primarily a source of pain and suffering. I think it's important to bear in mind that work serves a number of very, very valuable functions for us. It gives us a sense of structure, a place to go every day, a reason to get up in the morning, get dressed, presuming you need to do that to your work, an opportunity to meet with people beyond your immediate family and friends, an opportunity to contribute to something larger than yourself, an opportunity to play multiple different roles. So if things are challenging at home, work may be a place where you feel strong and solid and supported. And last but by no means least, it gives us some financial support. And while being rich may not make you happy, being poor or being having low income and so on can certainly contribute to poor mental health and well-being. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that this is what we're striving for, creating those workplaces and work settings where individuals are able to be productive and supported and psychologically strong at work.
Right. So you're saying that love and work or I should say Freud has said that love and work are the cornerstones of our humanness. And I'm just wondering if that premise is true, and as per the research and the gurus, that work provides meaning and social connection and structure and income, then why are we seeing so much workers struggling with these mental health issues at work?
Well, I think that's a very good question. And the larger question beyond this webinar is why now? Why in 2013 are we paying attention to these issues? They've been with us for a long time. I think there are a number of factors, and as reflected in this slide, a good way to look at it is look at those things in the environment, those considerations, factors, environment, which may be contributing, and also those things that may be individual factors. So when it comes to environment, there's a host of research on how high workload without any involvement in that workload, what's called control of your workload, and employee involvement certainly is a contributor. And we're seeing more and more people reporting high levels of workload and stress, certainly exacerbated by the use of media, where we have a 24/7 world and people responding to emails, providing emails outside of normal work hours. A second consideration is the lack of perceived support and recognition. So notice perceived support is a feeling that you are appreciated for work well done. And that may be financially, that may be reflected in the paycheck, but quite frankly, perhaps more meaningful is that recognition from your peers or one's boss or supervisor giving a sense that that's good work. So that recognition can come in a host of different ways, and a number of people don't experience that. And thirdly, a third example, and there are more, is change, and that can be positive change. It's worth noting that a new job, a new project, a promotion, which will have a positive thing, and so it adds to our sense of being overwhelmed. Then certainly negative change, be it a loss of some key people in your team, certainly unemployment or underemployment. One major stressor in a number of organizations seems to be the introduction of a new IT system. That seems to knock every organization for a loop. I should note that all of these factors, and there are more, those are just some key examples, note that we do not know definitively what causes a specific mental health disorder in a particular individual. It's probably some combination of biogenetic factors and psychosocial personal factors. So we can't really say that work caused a mental health disorder, but what we can say is the work, one's environment, does contribute to stress, and that certainly we know that stress can be a major trigger and or exacerbate an existing mental health or physical health condition. So also looking at the individual factors and so on, we all bring ourselves to work. I mean, there are parallels here to physical health and safety, and having poor problem-solving skills, feeling overwhelmed, the kind of things that worked in one situation but don't work very well when you face a new situation at work. Having a difficult or lack of interpersonal skills, and certainly the focus these days, justifiable focus on bullying, not having interpersonal skills, people behaving either aggressively or abusively towards other people, or people not knowing how to respond if there's a difficult interpersonal situation or conflict. And lastly, and as per my comment with respect to the importance of stress, lacking good stress management skills. And note that applies to your skills in managing home situations as well as work situations. So those are only some of the considerations. I guess my key point here would be that it's a combination of both. If we do want to do things in the workplace, we need to provide supports for the employee as well as addressing the organizational work environment.
So Merv, now that we sort of know that there are many contributors to mental health issues at work, I think it's important to ask the question, so what? So how does knowing what these contributors are in today's workplace help you as a manager or an employee to address some of these issues in your organization?
Well, very good question, and frankly, it's a matter of risk management, and indeed the standard does reflect that fact. If we can identify hazards and risks in our workplace, we're more likely to be able to do something about it. That's certainly been the approach in the health and safety domain for a number of years, is that we need to identify those specific factors and recognize, and again, address both. Reduce those that can be manageable and give people the protective skills, if you will, to address the things that may not change. If, for example, one works in a call center, to pick an easy example, which can be a pretty demanding job, it is in some ways a recipe for a high-stress job. You have limited control over what you can do. The calls keep on coming. You're required to be polite and helpful, even if at times you may not feel exactly that way. At times you may be mistreated or hear some very strong language in the other end, and you hang up that phone and go on to the next one. So that is the reality, perhaps, of that particular workplace. So what can a workplace do in, say, a call center to give people the skills and so on to manage what will be a challenging environment? And I think there's things that can be done, and I know that there are call centers out there that recognize this and do provide the supports and skills that can move on. But again, you need to identify the factors first before you can do anything about it.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Merv. I'm just wondering if you could maybe speak to some of the key questions that we should be asking ourselves in the context of psychological health and safety. I'm just pulling up some of those questions on the screen now, and maybe we can discuss these.
Sure, be happy to. The first question, just how common are mental health or psychological health concerns amongst employees in the workplace, and how do you know? These are to some extent rhetorical questions, but there is some data out there that may give you indicators of whether or not this is an issue, and those can include general employee satisfaction surveys or other kinds of surveys, exit interviews from employees, looking at your health and safety data. Those kind of things will give you some indication of the metric as to what concerns are, but certainly one of the best ways is to ask employees directly. And correspondingly, so what? To paraphrase your question, how does this actually impact morale, productivity, retention, costs? And it's a good point, because quite frankly, this is not about just being nice and a warmer and fuzzier place to work. This also is about productivity. Is this leading to people leaving their job, underperforming, staying at work demoralized and disengaged, and potentially providing passive or active sabotage to the work? This is about creating workplaces which are psychologically healthy and strong, but also productive and sustainable. And then the third question is looking around and seeing what kind of programs or policies are in place in the workplace, and do they work? How do people know about them? Can they access them easily? Do they trust those programs? Are they effective? There are a number of companies that will say, yes, we did, for example, sure, we did a stress management program 2 years ago. Well, that's great. Does it work? Well, we don't know. We haven't run it since. I was recently working with some colleagues who are providing a bunch of training programs on mental health awareness, mental health literacy, and this particular company was using a metric of determining how many of those workshops got canceled. That was our metric of success, and that's a very poor metric of success. So you really do need to look at the active utilization. Do new employees, are they made aware of the kind of programs and policies? Again, do they trust them? Do they use them? Do they work?
Yeah, that's important. I think I understand where you're going with that. And I think what I'd like to do at this point is just maybe take one more step backwards. And I'd like to ask our participants to answer a question on whether or not that they've actually downloaded our tool, the Standard, just to give a bit of a sense of what's going on here. So what I'm going to do is I'll open the poll up for about 30 seconds, and you'll have 30 seconds to answer this question: have you downloaded the Standard? So here we go. Okay, just a couple seconds left. It looks like there's quite a few people that have actually downloaded the tool, reviewed the Standard. So that's a really good indication that people are learning about what the Standard's all about. I'm just going to let this go. Okay, so it looks like we have approximately 75 of us have downloaded the Standard out of about 158, which means, you know, not quite all of us know about this tool, but for those of you who are not familiar with the tool, I did just want to mention that it is available through our website, to our partners' websites, to download, and it is an excellent tool which provides a lot of substantive material on the themes that we've been highlighting. So, you know, where do you begin as an organization? How do you communicate to your employees? What are the important steps of leadership and getting that leadership support on board? And so I did want to just highlight as well that one of the best parts of the Standard are all the tools that are available. And these are provided in the annexes of the Standard. So some of the information that we can locate in the annexes are listed on your screen right now. And the examples that I wanted to highlight are actually the sample audit tool, as well as a few of the related standards and guides. And one of these are actually called the Employer's Guide, which Merv and Dan Belsker helped create and write. And these are very useful because they provide additional background information, including workplace factors that can affect employees to psychological health and safety in the workplace. So I think that just gives us a little bit more perspective on who our audience is, Merv. And I think moving on, I'd like to discuss the 3 perspectives on improving psychological health and safety. So maybe you can talk to these, Merv?
Sure, be happy to. Thanks, Samantha. There are, and actually I'd say there are even more than 3, but there are often 3 kind of categories of things that people look at, or if you will, to create a business case for addressing PH&S, which is psychological health and safety. I will do a bit of a side comment just to clarify language. While we are talking about mental health in the workplace, for sure, what we have found, and that's reflected actually in the Employer's Guide that Samantha just alluded to, that the phrase psychological health, and more specifically psychological health and safety, seems to be a more encompassing term in the sense that when we talk about mental health, often folks go to stereotypes of mental illness and think about someone other than ourselves. When we talk about psychological health, it's all-inclusive. Not all of us will necessarily have a clinical depression. All of us get sad. Not all of us will have an anxiety disorder. All of us get stressed or worried. So from now on, when I'm talking about psychological health and psychological health and safety, I am including that, but I'm including the broad continuum of spectrum, including positive psychological health. So context. I'll also go into each of these points in greater detail, but I do think it's very, very important that before an organization takes on psychological health and safety in the workplace and strives to meet the expectations of the Standard, they develop the business case or the argument that's relevant for their particular organization. And it will vary from organization to organization and may even vary from one department or division within a large organization or one site to another. The reasons for this are to customize it for your particular needs and to create a meaningful argument that, frankly, the senior team, the leadership team within that organization understands and will adopt. So I get a little nervous about a kind of one-size-fits-all business case. But let's turn now to the particular areas of health, financial, and legal regulatory. So if we're talking about the health argument, if you will, first of all, it's important to recognize that mental health conditions, there are various epidemiological estimates out there. Conservatively, an estimate of 1 in 4 individuals will either have or be potentially diagnosed with mental health disorder at some point in their life. Note that the kind of disorders most commonly seen in the workplace setting are not typically those more serious and persistent mental health disorders such as schizophrenia, but are typically depression, anxiety, and I would add to that substance abuse or misuse. Those are the ones that tend to show up in the workplace. They are highly prevalent, and they often have their onset during adolescence, early adulthood, and in an individual's prime working years. They're either entering the workforce or functioning at work. Certainly, these such disorders also raise the risk for accidents, illnesses, and injuries. I don't think we have some research, but I don't think we've captured the entire research into how psychological factors such as fatigue, poor problem solving, deficits in concentration, and so on contribute to very significant accidents and injuries. I worked some years ago with a lumber company in northern BC, very good company, and they had a fatal accident. One of their employees had an accident with a major piece of heavy equipment. One of his colleagues said this particular individual had tragically lost a child, I think a week or two before, and then came back to work. And when his colleagues pointed out, said, he was in the cab, but nobody was there. So really recognizing that they can lead to physical ill health and incidents as well as psychological problems. We know that mental health, psychological health disorders are the fastest rising cause of long and short-term disability. An estimate by Karen Duroy several years ago now found that mental health disorders cost the Canadian economy in excess of $50 billion per year. Roughly a third to two-thirds of that borne by employers, not just by the healthcare system or taxpayer. The mental health disorders are the leading cause of disability in a number of sectors, including certainly here in British Columbia, healthcare and also the education sector. So they're upon us and they're not going away. Last point I think it's important to remember is that when we talk about psychological mental health disorders, we may tend to think about the emotional aspect of things, which is important. So, for example, we think about depression, we think about sadness. But depression also impacts one's ability to concentrate, one's energy level, one's interactions with others, one's sense of motivation, self-esteem. All of those are critical for productive and meaningful employment. So they have a very, very pervasive effect on the individual, his or her productivity, and his or her relationships with colleagues. Next slide, please.
Perfect, Merv. And before you go on, I just wanted to mention that some of our folks are having a little bit of difficulty hearing you, so maybe we could just have you a little bit. Thanks.
Let's see if this is better.
Perfect.
How's this? Is this better?
Sounds
Hello?
good.
Okay. Sorry for that. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the financial argument for addressing psychological health in the workplace and so on. There are a number of metrics or variables that can be indices of costs in the workplace. Certainly, one of the most common is presenteeism. In other words, people who have a health condition, whatever it may be, and are at work but are not being as productive. Indeed, it's worth bearing in mind that two-thirds of the folks with a mental health disorder such as depression and anxiety are not off work, but they're at work, but their performance is struggling. Correspondingly, absenteeism, and you will have metrics on absenteeism, is a significant cost factor for a lot of workplaces, and most workplaces will have some data on that. Also, certainly the Canadian system, we do have universal health care, but many employers and employees also have access to extended health benefits, including access to various kinds of support, possibly some psychological services, though not frequently enough in my opinion, and access to employee and family assistance programs. Looking at that data, looking at patterns of utilization, types of utilization, changes in utilization can be a good indicator of the kind of costs. And lastly, looking at the cost of grievances or any kind of legal work that may arise due to accusations of wrongful dismissal or conflict within the workplace. There are a number of areas of financial risk that an employer may see if they pay close attention to how these things are affecting their workplace. Great, thanks. So, speak a little bit more to the financial impact. As I said, Carolyn Dua's work suggested $52 billion per year. I suspect that's even higher now, and increasing. I should note that this issue of psychological health in the workplace is not just a flavor of the month. This has been with us for some time and increasing, and if employers do not address this issue, I would suggest they do so at their own peril. It's a major cause of long-term disability throughout, and can be the factor in certain sectors. It's interesting that my understanding amongst those employers that have adopted the standard, downloaded the standard, typically it is the areas like healthcare, the financial sector, social service sector that are paying attention to their credit. Other sectors still need to come along. The thing about mental health disorders as well, unlike physical health disorders such as musculoskeletal injury, they typically have a longer period of absence from work than other illnesses. The cost, I just came back from Australia, and the difference between the cost in addressing a musculoskeletal injury versus a psychological health injury or a psychological injury was about tenfold higher for the psychological injury. So they're expensive to deal with if people go off work, which does argue for providing an environment where we can support people to stay at work, even if they do have a mental health condition, presuming they can stay at work productively and safely. As I noted earlier, mental health problems tend to impact people in their prime working years, and increasingly we are viewing disorders such as depression as a chronic condition. There are effective treatments, but often these things recur. So they have an impact throughout the life course of that individual and throughout the course of that employment with that organization. And last point is the comorbidity of psychological health or mental health disorders with other physical disorders and other mental health disorders. As we know, the most common medication used to treat depression is alcohol. So we often get comorbidity of substance abuse. We often see comorbidity of anxiety and depressive disorders. And as I noted, we often see accidents and injuries that may arise out of mental health disorders, and whether it's one leading to the other or vice versa. There's also further research suggesting the mental health disorders, things like depression, increase one's risk of things like cardiovascular disease. So there really is a comorbidity that needs to be paid attention to.
Merv, I just received a really interesting question, and I'm wondering if you can offer your perspective on this. I got a question from an audience member who asks, how important is it for workplaces to consult with employers about mental health in the workplace? What are the most effective ways to do this? What are your thoughts on this?
So the question being for employers to consult with employees?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, well, very, very carefully, because we get into potential invasion of privacy kind of issues, of freedom of information issues. So I think it is inappropriate, and I welcome opinions to the contrary, but certainly inappropriate in any context I would be aware of for an employer to specifically ask about the presence of a mental health disorder in an employee. I think that would be invasive and potentially discriminatory. That said, I think questions about the employees' psychological job fit, making sure there's a good job fit, and being very realistic in describing the nature of the work and that some employees know what they're getting into would be appropriate. There are a number of psychological tools out there that are used for employee screening. None of them look specifically at, if you will, symptoms per se, but do look at things like resilience, hardiness, and values and so on in order to ensure a good job fit.
Okay, so would you agree, though, that consulting with employees on what's going on in their workplace, about mental health in the workplace, because I know I've gotten some feedback regarding, what do I say to my employer who feels that mental health is actually the responsibility of the worker? Like, don't we all play a key role in this?
Well, I think that I think ultimately there needs to be a partnership and collaboration between employers and employees. I think there is a rhetoric out there, for lack of a better word, that tends to blame the employer. It's all the employer's fault for a quote-unquote toxic workplace. And then on the other hand, although I may not hear this as publicly, they're sort of behind closed doors, this is all just a question of employees who are kind of slackers and can't cut it anymore. I don't think either of those are accurate, true, or fair. I do think that, again, we need that kind of collaboration, recognize that there is a partnership here, and that I absolutely agree. So raising awareness or mental health literacy, or quite frankly, moving beyond literacy into taking action, saying we need to throw our collective shoulders against the wheel in making a healthy workplace. It's in all our interests.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Collaborating is really important, both with the employers and the employees together.
Yeah, and if we get into that blame, I do come back to some parallels with physical health and safety. We made progress when in both unionized and non-unionized environments, when we recognized that this is a shared interest. And quite frankly, in this context, with the standard out there, as well as new regulations and requirements from compensation boards and the like, we really do need to work together because there's actually risk of liability.
Perfect. I'm going to move on to just get into our next sort of topic, which is actually guarding minds at work. And we've heard from a number of real organizations making concrete steps in ensuring their workplace is psychologically healthy and safe over the past few months that we've been doing these webinars. And I know that you mentioned earlier that there are a lot of tools available to employees, and I mentioned a bunch of them in the appendix of the standard. But I thought today it would be really beneficial for you to walk us through one example, and that would be guarding minds at work. So can you tell us what this is all about?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Guarding Minds at Work is a resource, a set of tools, in a sense, a package that was created in 2009 by myself and some colleagues at CARMA. CARMA is the Center for Applied Research in Mental Health and Addictions, Faculty of Health Sciences, Simon Fraser University. And we also work with Dr. Martin Shane, who certainly has been a leader in this area from a legal regulatory perspective. So we're very pleased at that. As I said, it was launched, the initial version was launched in 2009. We received support for this project, which we appreciate very much, from the Great West Life Center for Mental Health in the Workplace, which is funded by Great West Life Assurance Company. I do want to stress that this is an independent tool. This is not something that any particular insurance company or anybody else owns or can access information to. The only information is accessed with consent by the researchers. But I do want to acknowledge the contributions to the tool itself. So what it is, it's a set of tools to identify risks to psychological health and safety in the workplace and so on, find out how severe these risks are, the impact and so on, suggest a number of actions you can do to reduce the risks, and to evaluate the effectiveness of the kind of steps you do. It's basically, well, if people are familiar with a health risk analysis at an individual level, think of this as an organizational risk analysis. So some tools, a recommended audit tool within the standard for companies to sort of look, as we said earlier, at those particular factors in the workplace and then start to do something about it.
Perfect. And how was Guarding Minds at Work created?
Well, we went through a pretty elaborate process. The first jurisdiction that had a similar kind of risk assessment tool, psychosocial risk assessment tool, was the Health and Safety Executive in the United Kingdom. So we had the opportunity to consult with them and also looked at the empirical literature, primarily at stress in the workplace and its impact on physical and mental health. We also consulted a number of experts in this area, both Canadian and international experts. We looked at that time at the existing legislation and case law to make sure we were appropriately reflecting what guidance there was. That has, the legal and regulatory situation has certainly become even more prominent with the launch of the standard as well as legislation in various provinces. We also consulted with a variety of stakeholders, including HR professionals, union representatives, employer representatives, and in varying degrees, working individuals who were struggling or had struggled with mental health issues. So we got their input both in terms of building a useful set of resources, but also making sure that it was accessible and appropriate for all sides. We really didn't want to have something that was perceived as a one-sided tool, in other words, just something that was supporting employees or employers. It was something that would contribute to that collaboration I discussed earlier on. So we created a number of tools out there. I'll go through the particular tools later on, but really did create a package of resources that are readily available. All are free, available at no cost on the website, with a number of auxiliary resources that people can use, and available in French and English.
Perfect. And what is the specific goal behind Guarding Minds at Work?
Guarding Minds at Work is intended to be a tool to help those individuals identify the particular, well, I'm not even going to say risk, factors in their workplace, both positive and negative, that are contributing to the psychological health and well-being of the work environment and the employees, to address those factors if they're an area of concern, to do something to try and mitigate that risk, or if it's an area of strength, to try and use that strength to leverage even better psychological health in the workplace, take particular actions that will make a difference, have been demonstrated to make a difference, and then to evaluate whether or not those efforts are successful.
Perfect. And what are the specific components of Guarding Minds at Work?
Okay. I'll wait for a slide to come up.
Yeah, it's a little lag time there. Sorry about that.
That's okay. There are, as indicated, three main components. The first one, and I'll talk more about that one, is the assessment component, which is basically that assessment of what's going on in your workplace. The second is actually taking action. The third is an evaluating outcome. I will talk mostly about the assessment tool, since that's the one that most people seem to talk about. The assessment tool, well, we'll get into that in more detail. What you get out of the assessment and sort of the foundational model for Guarding Minds at Work are a set of factors that we know contribute to psychological health and well-being in the workplace. I should note that there's now a Guarding Minds at Work Mach 2, if you will. The initial Guarding Minds at Work tool determines 12 factors that impact the workplace. We did some revisions, and in 2012, frankly, in anticipation of the launch of the standard, revised the instrument in some fairly significant ways, and there are now 13 factors that are identified. So let's move on to the factors themselves.
Yeah, so when we started these workplace webinars, we actually talked to Marianne Baton from Great West Life to ask her what the key factors we should be looking at. And she reminded us that it's actually about our organizational approaches to policies, procedures, and practices that actually impact employee mental health. So what are your thoughts on the importance of these factors in the context of evaluating the workplace?
They're all very, very critical, as you can see up on screen and so on. As I mentioned, these are the 13 factors. Note that we're not talking risk factors, as some may be enabling. We had talked earlier about the importance of workflow or workload as a key factor. So that's reflected, for example, in workload management. And I'll speak briefly to that one as a good example, because it's not just about how much work you have. It's about your ability to manage the work that comes at you. Psychological support refers to a work environment where individuals are supported by their workplace if they may be struggling with stress or some mental health issues. So an example might be the availability of an EAP. Managers who have appropriate training and skills to take meaningful and useful action if someone is struggling, those kind of things. We talk about leadership as being a key factor. If that leadership isn't there and realistic expectations about addressing psychological health and safety, it's not going to be effective. Psychological protection is actually more about an environment where people are free of harassment, bullying, discrimination, mistreatment. So that's more of the legal side of things. Balance is a universal factor, if you will, often called work-life balance, though I prefer the term work-home balance because work-life balance implies that work isn't actually part of life, and I think it is. So those are all factors that for which there's both support in the literature, scientific literature, as well as the what's called the grade literature, but the writings within human resources and management publications. So Guardian Minds at Work measures where a company is at on each of those factors.
Right, and so looking at those assessment tools, it looks like you guys can provide an initial scan, like a 6-item survey, is that a 13-item survey? I'm not positive.
Yep.
And then the
yes,
organizational review.
Yep, there are 2 employee surveys, and then the premise is that employees are actually the best experts as to what's going on in the workplace. Now, I should stress, but the initial scan is a tool that Dr. Shane developed some years ago for Health Canada. So if you want kind of a quick look at where things are at, that one's a good one to use, particularly if you've just run another survey or have run the other survey. The PSR 13 survey is the main employee survey. Now, I do want to say a couple of things about that. That consists of a set of 65 questions that are answered anonymously online by employees. So people who sign up for Guardian Minds at Work get and want to run the survey, get a link, and they send that out to employees. I'll say some more in a minute about making sure that it's appropriately communicated. And that asks employees about their experiences in the workplace. We are unique in the world, quite frankly, amongst these kind of risk assessment tools because we were able to work with Ipsos Reid for both the 2009 and 2012 version of Guardian Minds at Work, and they administered our survey questions to a representative sample of originally, I believe it was 9,000 employees, and then for the later version, about 6,000 employees. So we actually are able to get norms based on a comparative sample. I can tell a particular employer how they fared against that national sample group, which is somewhat, from a psychological and psychometric point of view, a real strength. The organizational review is not a employee survey. It's, if you will, a self-assessment by the organization, whoever the key people are in the organization, the so-called organizational representatives, about them, their own perception of how they're doing in each of these factors. So it includes, amongst other things, the very questions that we ask employees about the factors turned around and asked from the employer's perspective. So, for example, a question might be, at our organization, we support individuals who may be struggling with a mental health concern. So it's a self-assessment, and in addition, there's a number of questions there about the kind of metrics one might look at, the definition of that factor, and identification of particular programs or policies that one may use to address that factor. Quite frankly, I think the organizational review, which is, again, is done as a self-assessment kind of tool, is of particular value, particularly if you compare the results of that with the overall employee survey. While certainly it may arise that the employees are rating factors differently and perhaps more harshly than employers, that doesn't always occur. I've certainly seen companies have completed the organizational review and have actually been harder on themselves or seen areas of greater concern than their employees did. So it's really, really helpful to look at a potential gap between the two.
So Merv, let's say we're starting off with an employee survey. Could you walk us through some of those options that we should be looking at when we create this?
Sure. As soon as I move the cat away from my computer screen. A survey is not an inert activity. In other words, it's really, really important to do it well. I've heard on a number of occasions, I just came back from a speaking tour, and a lot of people talk about survey fatigue. Employees feeling overwhelmed by surveys and either not responding or giving very skewed results. So I think it's really, really critical, if one's going to run a survey, including Guarding Minds' survey, to be very thoughtful and open and honest about why you're doing it. I think it's an invaluable tool. It's not the only tool, invaluable tool. But it can, but to communicate about it, and there's a number of documents on Guarding Minds at Work. There's a sample letter that can be put on company letterhead and sent out to all employees explaining what Guarding Minds at Work is and why that particular company is running the survey, and making a commitment, quite frankly, to share the results and take action as appropriate. So it also, Guarding Minds at Work allows comparisons within the particular organization. If there's a larger organization, it has multiple sites, multiple departments, different geographical areas. You can do a comparison internally as to how one particular aspect of the company is doing versus another. There's also information there to get some sense as to whether or not full-time employees, temporary workers, management workers, et cetera, are seeing things differently, so that it helps you sort of carve down and identify where issues may be arising. We've also included a few measures, self-assessments on presenteeism and how psychological health may be impacting productivity. And there is an option, if companies are interested, in customization with some additional questions and modification. I should note that CARMA, the organization with whom I work, has recently partnered with the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety to work on Guarding Minds at Work together. CCOHS is now providing administrative support and IT support for Guarding Minds at Work. So we're very pleased at that collaboration.
Yeah, that's a great collaboration. And so what, once these companies have completed a survey, what kind of results do they get?
Well, they do. They get a report card, and it's their own report card. I should stress that this is, again, not a measure of individual mental health. So what you see on screen is the report card that is generated if you've run the PSR 13 survey, and it gives you a sense as to essentially where you're at and where you may want to focus. So in this particular example, it's just a hypothetical one, this particular company did very strong, was very good in terms of employee engagement. So that's good to know. That's obviously a positive thing, and again, a point of possible leverage. If you are introducing a no program, you can tie it into your strong engagement. There's a greater likelihood that staff will take part in a new program. In this particular case, there were a couple of areas of concern, nothing that we would call serious concern, but a couple areas of significant concern. For example, let's pick both organizational culture and civility and respect are areas of concern. Psychological protection is the area of biggest concern, which would suggest that employees may not feel entirely safe from possibility of discrimination, harassment, bullying, those kind of things. So that would probably be an area you want to look at further and dig a lot deeper. I wouldn't just rely on the survey results. I would use the survey results to conduct some focus groups or further discussions with employees and try and get a better understanding as to why that seems to be an area of concern. I should note that those focus groups of discussion are not only a source of further data, they're also often a way of coming up with solutions. Employees, as I said, are experts within their particular company and therefore often best suited to come up with some good ideas as to what might make a difference.
Right, tell their story. So, Merv, how realistic is it to do this kind of assessment if you're a small or medium-sized organization?
Good point, and obviously certain challenges arise. We have set up Guarding Minds at Work in order to ensure confidentiality, that you need a minimum number of responses to the survey before you can generate a report card. So I think it's less than 10 responses, we won't generate a report card because there's some possibility that individuals could be identified. You could still use the organizational review. There's also lots of materials that could be downloaded from Guarding Minds at Work that give you some directions, including some suggestions specifically for small to medium-sized businesses. So the concepts are there. I do think that while often small businesses will not have an HR person, I've heard that on average a company needs to have at least 500 employees before they have a person dedicated to HR. But nonetheless, small companies tend to be more, for lack of a better word, nimble. They have a greater opportunity to make changes, and are not as cumbersome as some big organizations. And frankly, in smaller organizations, there's a greater sense of connection between people, and people are closer to ground, so they're quicker to see problems if they do arise.
Okay, perfect. With only 10 minutes left here, Merv, I'm wondering where we should focus our energy, and I'm wondering if you wanted to chat a little bit about the dashboards, or if you want to go into confidentiality and privacy. What would you like to chat about?
Let's go to confidentiality and privacy one, because that's an important issue that does arise.
Okay, perfect. So just while I'm pulling up this slide here, confidentiality is very important to us as employees and managers. So what are some of the typical questions that you tend to get about this?
Okay. I know you've posed some of the key ones that come up. All information is collected by an anonymous survey. If people choose to use the two survey tools I mentioned, they can complete that. They get a link. They complete it on their own time. The survey takes about 10 to 15 minutes. They can do it at work if they choose to do so. Some employers have provided dedicated workstations. They can also do it from home. None of that personal information is gathered or shared with the employer or with anybody else. There are no questions specifically on individual mental health. That's not what it's about. The information, there are multiple levels of consent that need to be completed. Consent both from the individual but also from what we call the organizational representative, or the person who is actually administering the survey within the company. And that information is only shared with a specific set of researchers at Simon Fraser. We've gone through several steps of ethical review as required by the University Ethics Department, and will not share that information or share any individual organization information with anyone without any permission. And I should stress again, very appreciative of Great West Life support, but neither they nor anybody else, including COHS, has access to the data other than the indicated researchers. So confidentiality is very important, and we certainly respect that.
Perfect. I'm just going to pull up the Guarding Minds at Work website for everybody. And I understand that here you can sign up for a dashboard, do a website walkthrough, have an orientation to the different dashboard materials. And while I might ask you a little bit more detail on this, I'm going to pull up a poll for everybody and ask how many of you have actually visited the Guarding Minds at Work website. And so I'll open that now. And Merv, maybe you can just chat a little bit about the dashboard.
Absolutely. The Guarding Minds site, you can go to the website and so on. All the material, there's a number of, all the documents are downloadable in French and English as PDFs. But if you do want to run the survey, which seems to be of particular interest to a number of people, which is great, you do need to log in. What that does, sign up for the dashboard, what that does is basically trigger an email back giving you a link as well as some other materials that can be sent to employees. So it's sort of the one place where you have to enter that kind of contact information to follow it through. So we can electronically administer the survey. Survey results, as I mentioned, come back to you as the administrator and include the report. Let's go to the next slide, if we could, because I'd like to talk a little bit about a project we're currently doing. So since we've launched Guarding Minds at Work, there's been a lot of interest from employers, large and small, across the country, public and private, and also, quite frankly, a fair amount of interest from some international organizations. What we're currently doing is trying to get a better understanding of what people's experience has been with Guarding Minds at Work, both with the website itself in terms of clarity, accessibility, ease of use, but also the actual tools themselves, the resources, the assessment tools, action tools, and evaluation tools. So I'm really hoping that in order to do this, we have created a survey, again, with Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, that we are distributing and asking people to take about 5 or 10 minutes to give us some feedback. This will help us make the tool better. And the next step of that project is actually to talk to some organizations who have run the survey in particular and are starting to take action. We really do want to develop some case studies that can illustrate both the challenges they faced as well as the outcomes and opportunities that arose as a function of taking action to address psychological health and safety. So with permission, I'd like to really encourage the participants in the webinar today to check that out and I will follow up with my Mental Health Commission colleagues and so on, and we may send you some more information about the survey, and I please ask you to respond and welcome your input.
That's fantastic. And just so you know, Merv, we do have about 33% of our audience members who have visited the Guarding Minds at Work. I'm sure there's many more who are going to after your presentation today. I would like to close with an interesting question that we received from the audience about stigma and discrimination. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to what can be learned from Guarding Minds at Work on stigma and discrimination, lack of respect in the work setting.
Very, very good question. That comes up, and I will let me even preface that question or my response with saying it does seem to be the case that harassment, discrimination, and bullying are sort of the thin edge of the wedge towards a psychologically or mentally unhealthy workplace. And indeed, that's reflected in the legislation, first of all in Quebec and then Ontario Bill 168, the Bill 13 out here in British Columbia. So that is a key issue. I don't think there is one particular factor which contributes to that. Certainly, organizational culture is key. That sets the tone for that kind of, if you will, inappropriate or misbehavior. Essentially, how people treat each other within the workplace is really key. I take some hope, quite frankly, that we have seen significant improvements, I think, in a number of workplaces with respect to how people of different nationalities, how gender and other things, we've made some improvement in that area, and I think we can make the same improvement here. I do worry, and this is my own comment to some extent, that we tend to conflate bullying, harassment with a mental health problem. Bullying and mistreatment of people is not appropriate in its own right and may or may not lead to a mental health problem. So they're both important issues, but they need to be addressed in their own way.
Excellent. I think that has been brought up before in our previous webinars, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today, Merv. You provided a wealth of information to us. I know that many of us are going to go and check out the Guarding Minds at Work website, as well as some of the other tools that we talked about at the beginning, especially the national standard. So if you have any questions, you can always contact me at skolopak@mentalhealthcommission.ca. The next webinar is October 30th, and that will be hosted at noon Eastern Time. That's the last Wednesday of every month. Please register by going to the link on your screen. That's mentalhealthcommission.ca/English/workinar. And please also take some time and fill out the survey that should start up once we finish this session today, as it's going to help us inform our future webinars and the next topics and speakers that we have for you. I always like to encourage everybody to ask questions before the next webinar, so definitely email me. Thank you all so much for your participation. This PowerPoint presentation and future presentations will be posted for free on our website in both English and French. The English recording will also be available on the Commission's YouTube channel. Thanks, everyone, and have a fantastic day.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Merv.